Jenny's voice trembled, her words slicing through the tension like a knife. She was leaving India. Forever. The room went silent for a heartbeat, and then Sumit's world collapsed. His eyes widened, disbelief etched across his face, his body stiffening as if gravity had suddenly doubled. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Then the dam broke. He crumpled, clutching at her hand, tears streaming down his cheeks, shaking his head as if trying to will her to change her mind. You could almost hear the cracking of a heart in the background, a pain so raw it didn't need words. Sarah here, welcome back to Sister Wives Daily. If you've been following every twist and turn of 90 Day Fiancé, you know nothing hits harder than a breakup caught in the spotlight. Today, we're talking about Jenny and Sumit, and trust me, you'll want to stay all the way through and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you were in their shoes? And hey, if you haven't already, subscribe because the drama is only going to get more intense. Sumit couldn't understand it. After years of fighting for this love, after navigating cultural misunderstandings, endless family objections, and public scrutiny, he thought they had somehow reached a fragile balance. He believed he could finally hold on to Jenny. And now, in a single sentence, she was tearing that belief apart. His mind raced, grasping at every possible way this could be a joke, a misunderstanding, a pause in her decision. Nothing made sense. How could someone he loved so fiercely just walk away? Jenny's face was calm, but her eyes told a different story. Exhaustion, heartbreak, and a quiet resolve mingled there. Every step she had taken to be with Sumit, the late-night flights, the endless compromises, the awkward family dinners, had led her to this point. She had tried, really tried, to fit in, to bend without breaking, to survive in a world that seemed determined to reject her at every turn. And now, after all of that, she realized survival meant walking away. There was a tension in the air that could have been cut with a knife. Sumit reached for her again, desperation lacing his voice. He asked questions he had never dared ask before. Why, how, what did he do wrong? He promised to change, to fight harder, to make everyone see her worth. And Jenny, with the gentlest firmness, shook her head. The answer was not in promises or tears, it was in the truth she had been carrying quietly for months. It wasn't just about love. It was about cultural pressure. Sumit's family had never fully accepted her, every visit marked by subtle judgment, whispered criticisms, and glaring comparisons to the ideal daughter-in-law they had envisioned. Friends and social media didn't make it easier. Every post, every comment, every judgmental glance was a reminder that she would never truly belong. You could see it in her movements, the way she flinched slightly when Sumit's mother walked in, the hesitation in her smile, the careful weighing of words before they left her lips. And yet, Sumit had somehow convinced himself it was all manageable. That if he loved her enough, if he explained enough, if he begged enough, it could all be fixed. He underestimated the toll of constant emotional strain, the quiet erosion of hope that builds over months and years. Jenny had carried that weight silently, masking frustration with patience, exhaustion with smiles. It was only when she reached the point of no return that the cracks became impossible to ignore. As they stood there, the contrast was unbearable. Sumit, raw and frantic, trying to stitch together a future that was slipping through his fingers. Jenny, composed but sorrowful, making a decision that she hoped would eventually bring peace, even if it meant heartbreak in the moment. Every glance, every pause, every shudder in the room told a story louder than words ever could. And then came the flashbacks, unspoken but visible in the tension. The family dinners where she had sat quietly, trying to engage but feeling invisible. The endless questions about her intentions and character. The social media trolls dissecting every step she took in India. Each memory stacked on top of the other, explaining why she had finally chosen to step away. She hadn't made this decision lightly. Every ounce of her energy had gone into trying to belong, to love, and to survive, and now it was gone. Sumit's pleas grew louder, bordering on frantic. Please, don't do this, Jenny. We can fix it, we can make them see. I love you. His voice cracked, and so did his composure. The audience watching could almost feel the heaviness in the air, the desperation that can only come from realizing you might lose someone forever. But Jenny's gaze remained steady, unwavering, almost painfully so. There was a quiet power in her silence, a knowledge that this was necessary for her own well-being. And just as it seemed like the scene couldn't get any more intense, there was a subtle shift. The camera caught a flicker of doubt, a hesitation, a final question that hung in the air like smoke. Could he have done something differently? Could things have turned out another way? The tension was unbearable. Everyone watching felt it, the pain, the heartbreak, the impossibility of reconciliation in that moment. Jenny's decision wasn't just personal, it was a statement. It was a declaration that love alone couldn't overcome every obstacle. That cultural barriers, family rejection, and emotional exhaustion could reach a point where walking away was the only path to clarity. And in doing so, she challenged not just Sumit, but everyone watching, to think about the cost of compromise and the weight of endurance. Sumit finally sank to the floor, shaking his head, tears soaking his shirt. His cries echoed the universal fear of losing someone irreplaceable. And yet, even in that devastation, there was a strange beauty in the honesty of the moment, a love so intense that it could break and still be real. Jenny stood there, resolute, the embodiment of courage in a situation where most people would crumble under pressure. Sarah here again. Sister Wives Daily welcomes you to witness this incredible, gut-wrenching moment. Comment below, what would you do if your heart told you to stay but your life told you to leave? Subscribe for more updates and join the conversation because Jenny and Sumit's journey is far from over, and we're breaking down every twist for you. As the scene closed, the room was heavy with unspoken words, with regret, with a sense that something had shifted irreversibly. Yet there was a subtle spark in Jenny's eyes, a glimmer of hope for a future she was choosing for herself. And while Sumit's tears dominated the moment, the story was far from finished. What really pushed Jenny over the edge might surprise you, and the next moments promise to reveal pressures, revelations, and decisions that no one could have anticipated. Even as the camera faded, the tension lingered. The questions hung in the air. Would Sumit fight to win her back? Would Jenny's decision stand? How would family dynamics continue to influence the outcome? And what could viewers learn from this story about love, boundaries, and resilience in the face of cultural and emotional obstacles? Jenny had arrived in India full of hope, carrying love in her suitcase and dreams in her heart. The first few days were a whirlwind of smiles, handshakes, and polite conversation, but it didn't take long for the cracks to appear. Sumit's family, polite on the surface, seemed to measure her with invisible rulers. Every word she spoke, every gesture, every attempt to blend in was scrutinized. She tried to learn Hindi phrases, to laugh at jokes she barely understood, to participate in family traditions, but it was like trying to join a dance where everyone already knew the steps except her. She smiled, nodded, laughed, but the weight of feeling other pressed down on her. Social media wasn't kinder. Fans and critics dissected her every move. Pictures she posted of herself wearing traditional attire were praised by some and mocked by others. Videos of her interactions with Sumit's family were shared with commentary ranging from supportive to judgmental. The pressure of performing both for the family and the camera created a constant tension. She couldn't just exist. She had to be correct, authentic, entertaining, and acceptable all at once. Every misstep was magnified, every hesitation was questioned. The mental load alone was exhausting. Sumit watched as Jenny bent over backward to make everyone happy. Sometimes she smiled when she was anxious, laughed when she was frustrated, and whispered reassurances to him when he noticed her struggle. Her persistence was admirable, yet Sumit rarely realized the emotional cost. He interpreted her efforts as determination, while the truth was more complicated, a mix of hope, love, and quiet desperation to belong. There were moments where boundaries blurred, where Jenny said yes when she wanted to say no, just to avoid confrontation or conflict. It was a delicate dance between persistence and self-preservation, and every step carried a silent weight. Fans online debated her motives endlessly. Was she truly in love, or was she chasing a dream too big for reality? Could she endure the cultural differences that seemed to expand with each passing day? Sumit's family, on the other hand, never openly rejected her but made subtle comments about her behavior, habits, and background. They asked questions that seemed innocent but carried judgment, like asking why she hadn't mastered cooking certain dishes, or why her social media presence was so different from what they expected. Jenny tried to laugh it off, tried to show patience, but the cumulative effect was invisible bruises on her spirit. It wasn't just the family. The city itself felt like an education in survival. Navigating crowded streets, unfamiliar foods, strange customs, and the constant hum of people's attention made her hyper-aware of every step she took. She learned quickly to anticipate reactions, to plan her words, to moderate her expressions, because the wrong glance could lead to questions or criticism. Sumit admired her adaptability but couldn't fully grasp how much energy it cost her. Every smile she gave, every compliment she offered, every polite gesture was a negotiation between love, respect, and self-protection. Even within private moments, tension lurked. Sumit sometimes wanted to help, to shield her from criticism, but he was caught in his own dilemmas. Family loyalty, cultural expectations, and his own emotional fragility often left him paralyzed. When Jenny looked for reassurance, he gave encouragement, but sometimes it wasn't enough. She felt alone in a crowd of people who were supposed to be her allies. She felt misunderstood, unappreciated, and increasingly exhausted. And then came the small, everyday reminders of difference: cultural misunderstandings over traditions, language missteps that drew giggles or frowns, social media reactions that felt like whispers of judgment, and private critiques that stung more than she could admit. Every small incident seemed insignificant alone, but the cumulative weight became enormous. It tested her patience, her hope, and her love. She kept going, smiled through it, and tried to adapt, but the question grew louder each day. How long could she keep bending without breaking? By the third month, Jenny's resilience was impressive. She had learned to anticipate family routines, to understand unspoken expectations, and even to navigate online scrutiny. She had mastered the art of politeness and endurance, yet the strain was subtle but constant, a pressure that never went away. Sumit, focused on his love for her, sometimes overlooked these quiet battles. He saw the smiles, the laughter, the engagement, and assumed the journey was easier than it truly was. He didn't fully see the layers of compromise, the emotional energy drained daily, or the sense of invisibility that shadowed Jenny's efforts. Fans continued to weigh in, some applauding her efforts, some questioning them, and some speculating wildly about the future. "She'll stay, right?" became a frequent comment on posts. "Can she really handle it?" Others offered support, reminding her and Sumit that love doesn't need perfection. Social media became a mirror reflecting not just the drama but the emotional stakes, amplifying every choice, every step, every smile. Jenny had to navigate it all while keeping her emotional balance intact. Even with this constant pressure, Jenny's love for Sumit remained genuine. She wanted to belong, to be accepted, and to create a life together. But boundaries matter. Persistence can inspire, but without recognition, without mutual understanding, it can become exhaustion. Every gesture, every compromise she made, every effort to please others chipped away at her internal reserves. The gap between her external composure and internal struggle widened, leaving her at a crossroads that few outside her experience could fully comprehend. And yet, for all her efforts, one particular incident changed everything. It wasn't the small criticisms, the social media commentary, or the minor family disputes. It was a single event, a moment when the weight of expectation, miscommunication, and emotional strain collided that made her realize her endurance had limits. This was the turning point, the invisible crack in a facade she had maintained for months. The realization hit her hard. Love alone could not shield her from persistent emotional pressures and cultural barriers. By now, you can see why Jenny's decision feels both shocking and inevitable. Every smile, every compromise, every careful gesture had been a battle, and finally, the consequences of these struggles had reached a tipping point. The next steps would not just define her relationship with Sumit, but also her own sense of self-worth, her future, and the life she wanted to lead. How she would navigate these pressures and the reactions of everyone around her would be the story that unfolds next, and it promises revelations that no one saw coming. Sumit's hands shook as he sank onto the floor, staring at Jenny as if she were a mirage he could reach but never touch. His chest heaved, each breath jagged, his mind racing faster than he could form coherent thoughts. Panic gripped him in a way he hadn't felt before, raw and suffocating. He couldn't process her words. Leaving India, leaving him, leaving everything they had tried to build together. It felt impossible, unfair, and completely irreversible. His first reaction was disbelief, then pleading, then a desperate, almost frantic need to control a situation that had already slipped out of his hands. Behaviorally, what Sumit was experiencing wasn't unusual. When someone faces imminent loss, the brain can trigger a cascade of panic and impulsivity. Attachment systems kick in, amplifying every emotion, distorting reasoning, and focusing all energy on trying to prevent separation. Sumit's pleas, frantic gestures, and even his trembling voice were natural manifestations of attachment anxiety, magnified by the high-stakes environment of family pressure and cultural expectation. He wanted to fix everything immediately, to erase all pain, but he didn't have the tools, or perhaps the awareness, to do so effectively. He remembered the nights he had promised himself he would protect her, shield her from criticism, and be her ally. And yet, he hadn't anticipated the subtle accumulation of rejection, the quiet weariness that had crept into her eyes, the weight of expectation she carried alone. Regret hit like a tidal wave. Every missed opportunity to reassure her, every time he underestimated the strain of family scrutiny, every casual remark he had brushed off suddenly felt monumental. What he had assumed was minor had actually been part of a much larger emotional erosion. Sumit's family, meanwhile, had always hovered at the edges of his decisions. Their expectations were woven into the fabric of his life, shaping what he could say, do, or feel. Love alone wasn't enough when cultural and familial duty demanded obedience, respect, and adherence to unspoken rules. He felt torn, trapped between the desire to pursue his heart's wishes and the obligations imposed by the people who raised him, loved him, and held sway over his life. Each emotional tug made his panic sharper, his desperation more urgent. He leaned forward, resting his head in his hands, the room spinning around him. How did I miss this? How did I let it get to this point? His thoughts spiraled into self-recrimination. Sumit was acting impulsively, a common response to fear of loss, trying to patch a situation that required patience, empathy, and careful communication. In his panic, he missed the subtle signals Jenny had given him, the moments where she had silently begged for understanding and acknowledgement. Now, those signals felt like missed chances, like doors closing forever. Even as he cried, he remembered the small victories they had shared, inside jokes, late-night talks, quiet moments where he felt her love in its purest form. The contrast between those memories and the current devastation made the collapse even more intense. He oscillated between hope and despair, wondering if he could reverse the decision, if he could somehow remind her of their bond, if he could fight harder, love harder, and win her back. But reality pressed in. Love alone had limits. The emotional strain, the family pressures, the cumulative effect of rejection had already taken its toll on Jenny. Sumit's impulsive reactions became more pronounced as he stood and gestured wildly, almost as if moving could change the outcome. "I'll do anything, I'll change everything, I'll prove it to everyone," he shouted, each word a mix of panic, defiance, and helplessness. Behavioral psychology shows that in such moments, humans often overcompensate, trying to repair loss through extreme action, even when the path to resolution requires calm understanding and communication. Sumit's actions reflected the tension between his desire for control and the recognition that he had none. Family influence loomed like a shadow. His mother, father, and siblings had their own expectations and judgments, silently shaping his choices. He felt trapped between personal desire and cultural duty. To fight for Jenny fully would be to risk familial disapproval. To yield to duty would be to lose her. Every move carried weight, every word was loaded, and the pressure compounded, feeding the emotional meltdown. His desperation was not just about losing love, it was about failing his family's unspoken standards and the guilt that followed. Even in his lowest moment, Sumit's mind flickered to strategic thinking. How could he change her mind? How could he negotiate? How could he soften the impact? Each idea was immediately countered by emotional panic, creating an internal tug-of-war that kept him stuck. He oscillated between hope and helplessness, sometimes speaking in rapid bursts, sometimes falling silent in disbelief. Observers could see the pattern: intense attachment, impulsive gestures, overestimation of influence, underestimation of Jenny's resolve. It was a textbook display of crisis behavior under extreme emotional duress. At one point, Sumit's voice broke completely. "Please, you can't go. I can fix it. I swear, I can make it right." His tears were no longer just sadness. They carried regret, fear, and the crushing weight of knowing he had overlooked warning signs. Every missed cue from Jenny now loomed large, magnified by the immediacy of potential loss. Social media chatter, family scrutiny, and fan expectations all felt amplified in that moment, adding layers of guilt and panic to his collapse. The room itself seemed to mirror his emotional state. Every sound, every glance, every shadow amplified the tension. He couldn't escape the pressure, it followed him relentlessly. And yet, despite the collapse, there was a fragile clarity emerging. Deep down, Sumit realized that pleas alone could not repair the situation. He had to reconcile his attachment, acknowledge the limits of control, and confront the reality of Jenny's boundaries, though doing so in the moment was nearly impossible. Even in this chaos, one thing became painfully clear. Sumit's desperation highlighted the human cost of unresolved expectations and misaligned cultural pressures. His panic wasn't weakness, it was love overwhelmed by circumstance, emotion magnified by duty, and hope clashing with reality. As he paused, breathless and trembling, the question hung heavily in the air. Could he navigate family pressure while honoring his own desires? Could he repair a relationship strained by cultural expectations, unspoken criticisms, and months of emotional fatigue? Fans watching online debated endlessly, some sympathizing with his despair, some criticizing his impulsive actions, all wondering if love alone could overcome the weight of external influence. And yet, in the middle of his emotional meltdown, Sumit's heart still held threads of hope. Threads that reminded him of shared laughter, of quiet conversations, of moments where Jenny had leaned on him in trust. Those memories spurred him on, kept him fighting in ways that were sometimes impulsive, sometimes irrational, but always human. His struggle embodied the tension between desire and duty, love and pressure, panic and reflection. By now, Sumit's emotional collapse had become a public spectacle. His anguish played out both in the room and in the swirling commentary of fans and social media. Yet amidst all of this, a subtle shift was emerging. A realization that his actions alone could not determine the outcome, that attachment and panic had limits, and that Jenny's own needs and boundaries were paramount. As the scene drew to its most intense point, the question lingered for everyone watching. Would Sumit's desperation be enough, or had Jenny already reached the point where no amount of pleading could change her mind? The next moments promised to reveal just how fragile love can be under the weight of cultural expectations and emotional strain. Jenny sat quietly, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning yet strangely clear. Months of stress, compromise, and emotional labor had drained her, leaving a mix of exhaustion and clarity that she couldn't ignore. Each smile she had offered, each effort to fit in with Sumit's family, each nod to expectations she didn't fully share, had built a weight on her chest. Now, finally, she understood something essential. Boundaries weren't optional, and personal happiness wasn't negotiable. Her love for Sumit remained, but it had to coexist with self-respect, or it would crush her entirely. She reflected on her journey with a measured calm. Jenny's choices had always been deliberate, not impulsive. Every step she had taken in India was an effort to bridge worlds, to honor Sumit's family, and to create a life that included love, acceptance, and compromise. But compromise without recognition, sacrifice without reciprocity, and persistence without understanding can slowly erode the strongest relationships. She recognized this dynamic clearly now, and it gave her a strange peace. Even as she felt love, she also felt limits. Love was not permission to endure constant emotional strain. Her mind had cataloged every instance of subtle judgment, every glance that carried skepticism, every social media comment that critiqued her existence in a foreign culture. Jenny had carried those invisible bruises silently, internalizing them and trying to be stronger, more patient, more accommodating. But patience has boundaries, and strength has limits. She was standing at the edge of that limit. The psychological toll was real. Constant adaptation, emotional labor, and social scrutiny can create a state of quiet fatigue, a pressure that others often fail to see. Jenny's clarity emerged not from anger, but from a deeply empathetic understanding of herself. She knew she couldn't continue sacrificing her sense of self in the hope that love alone would be enough. Emotional intelligence, in this moment, meant recognizing the pattern, respecting her boundaries, and making a choice that honored her needs as much as her feelings for Sumit. She thought about all the conversations she had held with herself during long walks, late-night thoughts, and silent tears. What did she want her life to look like? Could she imagine enduring years of subtle disapproval and unspoken judgment? Could she continue to give love endlessly without receiving validation, support, or genuine reciprocity? Her answer had gradually emerged through reflection. No, Jenny's decision wasn't sudden, though it felt monumental. It was the culmination of countless small moments where she had measured her emotional reserves and realized she had nothing left to give if the environment around her didn't change. She weighed love against duty, hope against exhaustion, and realized that personal happiness had to take precedence, not in opposition to love, but in alignment with her values and boundaries. As she prepared herself mentally to confront Sumit, she felt a tension that was both familiar and new. The familiar tension of love, of wanting to stay, of holding on to the possibility of togetherness, clashed with the new clarity that survival required action. Her mind raced through options, consequences, and emotional fallout, but the outcome was clear: she had to protect herself. The stakes were intensely personal and deeply emotional. She paused and asked herself a question that anyone in her shoes might have asked. What would I do if I loved someone but couldn't survive the environment around me? The answer was impossible to ignore. She had tried to bend, to fit, to endure, to adjust, but the situation had crossed a threshold where continuing to adapt would mean losing herself entirely. Love required balance, and the balance had tipped too far in the wrong direction. Even with this clarity, the decision was heart-wrenching. Jenny's love for Sumit didn't disappear, it simply had to coexist with reality. The thought of telling him filled her chest with anxiety. How would he react? How could she preserve compassion while asserting her boundary? How could she hold space for his heartbreak while honoring her own needs? These were the questions swirling in her mind as she rehearsed the moment she would finally speak. Her internal dialogue was a mix of empathy, strategy, and self-preservation. She reminded herself that protecting her emotional well-being was not selfish, it was essential. She knew that without boundaries, love can become a cage rather than a sanctuary. Jenny had learned to distinguish between compromise that strengthens a relationship and sacrifice that erodes it. And in this realization, she found a strange courage. Jenny also considered the cultural pressures that weighed heavily on the situation. Sumit's family, the expectations of society, and even the constant scrutiny of social media had amplified the emotional stakes. She knew that leaving India would shock many, and she anticipated the reactions of both family and fans. But Jenny had come to understand that decisions motivated by self-preservation are valid, even when they disrupt expectations. True love, she realized, doesn't demand erasure of self, it coexists with personal integrity. Her heart still held longing, moments of joy, and memories of laughter with Sumit, but emotional intelligence required her to differentiate between nostalgia and necessity. Could she continue to live in a space that drained her energy and undermined her sense of belonging? Could she maintain love in an environment that consistently challenged her limits? Her clarity told her she could not. Jenny's final preparation was deeply introspective. She visualized the conversation ahead, the questions Sumit might ask, the tears, the pleading, and the potential arguments. She asked herself repeatedly, how can I communicate honestly without being cruel? How can I honor him while also honoring myself? The answers required both emotional awareness and courage, and she found both in abundance. She paused for a moment and considered the audience watching. What would you do in her place? Would you stay in a situation that eroded your self-worth for love, or would you make the difficult choice to walk away, preserving both your integrity and hope for a healthier future? Jenny's decision is a reflection of the human struggle to balance love, duty, and personal happiness under extreme pressure. The tension built as she thought of the moment she would tell Sumit. Her heart raced, adrenaline mixed with sorrow, and yet a calm determination underpinned her every breath. She had reached a point where hesitation was no longer an option. Every reflection, every long night, every confrontation with her own doubts had prepared her for this. She understood the consequences, yet accepted them with poise. Even in this moment of clarity, a subtle fear lingered. How would Sumit respond to the boundary she was about to assert? Would his grief translate into understanding or anger? Could he see that her decision stemmed from self-respect rather than rejection of him? These questions hovered, intensifying the drama without diminishing her resolve. Jenny's emotional state was a balance of exhaustion and empowerment. She had experienced heartbreak, frustration, and isolation, yet she had reached a point of self-awareness and courage. Every small decision she had made over the past months, every moment of patience, every compromise, had led to this one pivotal choice. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As she rose to speak, there was a quiet intensity in her movements. Her mind was a blend of strategy, empathy, and determination. She would communicate clearly, assert boundaries, and honor both herself and Sumit. And while the moment of revelation was imminent, it wasn't yet time to unveil it. The audience, just like Sumit, could only anticipate what would happen next. Jenny had reached the culmination of her internal journey, the intersection of love, duty, and personal happiness. What she would say next, and how Sumit would respond, promised to define not just their relationship, but her own sense of freedom and well-being. The next moment would be unforgettable. The room was thick with tension as Jenny finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. Sumit's eyes widened, his chest rising and falling in rapid, uneven breaths, each one a silent plea. He reached for her hand instinctively, as if contact alone could undo the months of struggle, the cultural pressure, and the emotional fatigue that had built up between them. "Please, Jenny, don't do this. I can fix everything, I promise," he said, desperation seeping into every word. The cracks in his composure were clear, every tremor, every hitch in his voice revealed the panic he felt at the thought of losing her. Jenny held his gaze steady, almost painfully so. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, visualizing the questions, the arguments, the tears. She had asked herself, how do I honor him without sacrificing myself? How do I stay truthful without being cruel? Every instinct told her to step back, to soften, to offer compromise. But her mind reminded her that compromise had limits. She loved him, but love alone could not sustain a life where her boundaries were consistently ignored. Sumit's behavior escalated quickly. He moved closer, gesturing wildly, shaking his head in disbelief. "I don't understand. We've been through so much. I thought we were building a life together," he said, voice cracking under the weight of regret and fear. Behavioral psychology tells us that when faced with potential loss, attachment systems spike, driving people toward impulsive action, frantic problem-solving, and emotional escalation. Sumit was acting out of desperation, trying to control the uncontrollable, and it only heightened the drama of the confrontation. Jenny listened, acknowledging his feelings without letting them sway her decision. She empathized with his panic, understood the fear driving his gestures, yet she maintained her clarity. Love without boundaries can turn into exhaustion, she reminded herself. Emotional intelligence in high-stakes moments means holding space for another person's pain while protecting your own well-being. It wasn't easy. Each tear he shed, each pleading look, tugged at her heart, yet she remained resolute. The dynamic between them was further complicated by Sumit's cultural pressures. His family's subtle judgments, their unspoken expectations, and the weight of tradition all amplified his panic. Every emotion was filtered through the lens of duty versus desire. He wasn't just fighting for Jenny, he was grappling with how his choices would be perceived, how his adherence, or deviation, would reflect on him in a society that values family approval as much as personal happiness. This tension intensified every word, every gesture, every heartbeat in the room. Jenny's own coping mechanisms were clear. She had spent months building emotional resilience, practicing mindfulness, and developing the courage to honor her limits. Each carefully chosen word in this confrontation was deliberate, each pause measured to maintain both honesty and compassion. She refused to engage in arguments that would compromise her boundaries. Instead, she communicated with precision, conveying love while asserting necessity. She understood that emotional clarity was a form of respect for herself and for Sumit. Fans watching on social media had been predicting this confrontation for weeks, but nothing prepared them for the raw, unfiltered display of emotion unfolding on screen. Sumit's escalation, Jenny's composed resolve, and the subtle cultural undertones created a high-stakes emotional landscape. Each movement, glance, and tone shift offered insight into the complex interplay between love, duty, and personal agency. The audience could see the stakes in every micro-expression, the silent struggle behind each tear. Even in the intensity of the moment, small behaviors hinted at unresolved tension. Sumit's hands trembled not just from panic, but from the realization that he had underestimated the depth of Jenny's exhaustion. Jenny's subtle sighs and brief pauses suggested the weight of the emotional labor she had carried for months. These tiny cues were nearly imperceptible, yet they communicated volumes. Love had been tested, boundaries had been challenged, and the path forward was far from simple. At this point, it was impossible to look away. Every second heightened the tension, and viewers found themselves holding their breath. What would Jenny say next? Could Sumit's pleas shift her decision? The answer was unclear, and the suspense was electric. Sumit tried a new approach, softening his tone, lowering his gaze, attempting to appeal to Jenny's empathy. "Please, just tell me what I can do. I'll listen, I'll change anything," he said. His words reflected classic attachment behavior under threat, seeking reassurance, attempting repair, and hoping emotional display would influence decision-making. Jenny, aware of these psychological dynamics, remained composed. She understood his desperation was genuine, but she also recognized that yielding now would undo months of personal growth and self-preservation. Their conversation swirled with emotion, escalating and receding in waves. Sumit's pleas were intense, sometimes bordering on frantic, while Jenny's responses were deliberate, calm, and measured. The contrast highlighted not just the individual stakes, but the clash of coping mechanisms. Impulsive emotional display versus deliberate boundary maintenance. It was a vivid example of how love, fear, and cultural expectations collide under pressure. Even subtle shifts in body language added tension. Sumit leaned forward as if physical proximity could bridge emotional distance. Jenny's small step back maintained spatial boundaries, signaling her resolve without confrontation. Each micro-movement told its own story, reflecting unspoken power dynamics, love, regret, and determination. Fans could read these cues online, analyzing every glance, pause, and gesture, further amplifying the sense of suspense and emotional investment. The intensity of the confrontation reached a peak when Sumit's voice broke. "Please, I can't lose you. I can't imagine life without you." His words were raw, unfiltered, and desperate, an emotional plea for both forgiveness and reconsideration. Jenny's eyes reflected empathy, sorrow, and a quiet certainty. She had already weighed the consequences, and though heartbreak was inevitable, she knew the choice had to be hers alone. Love required honesty, and honesty demanded courage. The cultural context continued to loom in the background. Sumit's obligations to his family, unspoken social expectations, and the constant gaze of judgment created an emotional tension that neither could escape. Jenny's decision to assert boundaries was, in part, a confrontation with these pressures as well. Walking away wasn't just about personal happiness, it was a challenge to the norms that had contributed to her emotional exhaustion. Even as the conversation progressed, subtle twists kept viewers on edge. Sumit's occasional silence, his quick breaths, Jenny's fleeting frown, the brief flicker of regret in her eyes, all hinted that the story was far from resolved. The tension was palpable, drawing audiences deeper into the emotional vortex. Finally, after a long pause, Jenny's posture shifted slightly, signaling that the moment of revelation was approaching. Sumit leaned closer, sensing the change, while the audience waited with bated breath. Every second stretched, every gesture amplified, as if time itself had slowed to capture the magnitude of the decision about to be spoken. Their dynamic captured the essence of human complexity: love intertwined with fear, attachment entangled with self-preservation, cultural expectation clashing with personal desire. Behavioral psychology shows us that in moments like this, emotional escalation often triggers both fight and flight responses simultaneously. Sumit oscillated between pleading and surrender, hope and despair, while Jenny balanced empathy with clarity, compassion with courage. As the confrontation reached its emotional apex, it was clear that the room held more than heartbreak. It carried tension, unresolved questions, and subtle hints that the story was far from over. Every glance, every word, every pause hinted at consequences yet to unfold. Both participants were fully human in their reactions, raw, vulnerable, and deeply complex. But even as viewers absorbed the intensity, one question lingered. Could love, courage, and emotional honesty coexist when external pressures were so relentless? The next moment promised a revelation that would shock everyone watching. The moment Jenny walked away, the room felt hollow, even with cameras rolling. Crew members exchanged quiet glances, capturing reactions that would later be analyzed frame by frame. Some whispered in awe at the raw emotion on display, while others simply shook their heads at the intensity they had witnessed. It was a high-stakes moment, charged with heartbreak, cultural tension, and personal confrontation, and everyone on set seemed acutely aware of it. Social media had already exploded, fans dissecting the video seconds after it aired, debating who was right, who was wrong, and what could have been done differently. Behind the scenes, production staff worked silently, careful not to interfere yet trying to anticipate what would unfold next. They had seen countless emotional confrontations, but this one carried a weight that felt different, less performative, more authentic. Sumit's breakdown was raw, unfiltered, his gestures, tears, and pleas captured without embellishment. Jenny's calm assertiveness, paired with the exhaustion etched across her features, conveyed both compassion and finality. Cameras could only record what was visible, but anyone watching closely could sense the tension between personal vulnerability and the pressure of the cameras themselves. The psychology of filming such moments is fascinating. Being on camera amplifies emotions in unpredictable ways. Some people, like Sumit, react more intensely under observation, their attachment and panic heightened by the implicit knowledge of an audience. Others, like Jenny, display more controlled responses, drawing on emotional intelligence and self-preservation to communicate clearly despite scrutiny. It's a subtle dance between authentic reaction and awareness of being watched, and in this case, both extremes were on full display. Crew members noted the contrast immediately. While Sumit's gestures were erratic, almost impulsive, Jenny's movements were deliberate. Every glance, every pause, every carefully modulated breath suggested awareness of both the cameras and the emotional stakes. Fans online quickly noticed these patterns as well, debating in comments whether Jenny's calm demeanor reflected strength or detachment, whether Sumit's chaos reflected love or panic, and what that said about the sustainability of their relationship. Even in the controlled chaos of production, moments of levity emerged. One cameraman whispered something to a colleague, almost inaudible, and both chuckled briefly before refocusing on the scene. Those small human moments reminded everyone that behind the high drama facade, real people were witnessing, documenting, and navigating emotional intensity in real time. Social media amplified this further, with clips, reaction videos, and memes emerging almost immediately. Fans were no longer passive observers, they were commentators, critics, and part of the ongoing narrative, influencing perception even from thousands of miles away. Jenny, meanwhile, felt the weight of her decisions settle fully after leaving the room. Cameras continued rolling, but the moment had shifted from confrontation to reflection. Every step she took, every sigh she breathed, carried the dual awareness of personal liberation and public scrutiny. She could feel the judgment, the empathy, the curiosity radiating from crew members, but also the quiet understanding of those who recognized the courage it took to act on one's boundaries under pressure. Fans online began debating fiercely: was Jenny empowered or heartbroken? Was Sumit desperate or self-centered? The conversations spiraled, ensuring that attention remained fixed on the unfolding story, amplifying both anticipation and emotional engagement. Social media reactions reflected the range of human interpretation. Some applauded Jenny's courage, recognizing her right to self-preservation and autonomy. Others sympathized with Sumit, highlighting the devastation that comes when love and cultural expectation collide. Memes emerged, reaction videos proliferated, and hashtags trended, all focused on dissecting the smallest nuances. The tilt of Jenny's head, the quiver in Sumit's voice, the subtle gestures that cameras had captured in slow motion. Every frame became evidence, every pause a topic of debate. Behind the scenes, crew members also documented private moments, whispered conversations, quiet exits, and the occasional phone call to loved ones. These glimpses revealed the human complexity behind reality television. Participants weren't merely characters, they were people navigating trauma, expectations, and intense emotional pressure under the gaze of both cameras and fans. Watching these moments, it became clear how authenticity and performance often intertwine, creating a narrative that is both compelling and ethically intricate. Jenny's own reflection after the confrontation was equally revealing. She walked quietly, collected her thoughts, and processed the emotional rollercoaster that had just occurred. She had been observed, analyzed, and judged, yet she felt a sense of liberation in having acted decisively. Each step toward clarity reinforced the importance of self-awareness and emotional boundaries. Fans watching could sense this subtly, even through aired footage, and many commented on the quiet strength that underpinned her actions. Sumit, on the other hand, grappled with the aftermath differently. His emotional exhaustion remained, compounded by reflection and social media commentary. Each notification felt like a mirror, reflecting both fan opinion and personal regret. His coping mechanisms, pleading, reasoning, seeking reassurance, were temporarily exhausted, leaving raw emotion in its place. Behavioral analysis would suggest that he was experiencing a classic attachment response. Intensified distress at perceived loss, compounded by cultural pressures and the public nature of the breakup. Yet even in these raw moments, subtle hints of future tension emerged. Sumit's small gestures, the occasional glance toward Jenny, the slight hesitation before walking away, all suggested that unresolved feelings lingered. Jenny's own expressions, brief moments of hesitation, a sigh that carried both relief and sorrow, hinted that while she had made a decisive choice, emotional resolution would take time. These nuances became key talking points for fans and analysts, keeping curiosity high and engagement steady. Production staff worked to maintain calm on set, ensuring that filming could continue without adding stress to an already volatile situation. Their presence was invisible yet vital, capturing moments that would later form the backbone of discussion, both on social media and in subsequent episodes. Behind the cameras, they witnessed the delicate interplay between performance and authenticity, between deliberate communication and raw human emotion, highlighting the complexity of documenting real-life heartbreak. By now, viewers could feel the tension building toward what comes next. Jenny's departure was only the beginning. The aftermath promised revelations, adjustments, and unexpected interactions that would continue to challenge both participants and audience expectations. Fans speculated endlessly. Would Jenny return? How would Sumit cope in private? What would her life look like outside the environment that had drained her emotionally? These questions fueled engagement and ensured that attention remained fixed on the unfolding story. Every small gesture caught on camera, every comment online, and every production note added layers of suspense, keeping viewers invested and curious. As the day wore on, Jenny processed both the public and private aspects of her decision. She understood that while cameras recorded events, her emotional reality existed beyond their lens. Moments of reflection, quiet breath, and internal dialogue highlighted the duality of living life under constant observation. Private resolution alongside public narrative. Fans watching could intuitively sense this duality, contributing to the intensity of engagement. Sumit, meanwhile, began considering next steps, reflecting on personal growth, family expectations, and potential reconciliation. Even amidst heartbreak, his behavior hinted at future complexity. Attachment and cultural pressures wouldn't simply vanish. These subtle reactions planted seeds for future drama while maintaining emotional authenticity. Small, seemingly mundane behaviors took on amplified meaning. The way Sumit avoided certain rooms, the quiet gestures Jenny made while processing, even minor interactions with crew members. These moments provided a continuous layer of intrigue, teasing future developments and keeping the audience emotionally invested without disrupting the narrative flow. Even in the slower moments, retention remained high because every glance, sigh, and social media reaction hinted at unresolved tension and upcoming developments, ensuring that viewers were hooked for what comes next. Jenny's departure wasn't simply an exit from a room, it was a pivot in her life, a statement of autonomy, and a challenge to the expectations that had constrained her. Sumit's response was equally layered. Raw emotion, cultural pressure, and attachment instincts clashing with the new reality. The interplay of these forces created a rich tapestry of emotional storytelling that kept fans on edge and deeply engaged. And yet, the narrative wasn't finished. Even as cameras paused, fans speculated, and social media churned, both Jenny and Sumit faced a future of unknown consequences. Their personal journeys had shifted irrevocably, but the story had many more layers to reveal. The next moment promised to continue the tension, with subtle surprises, unexpected choices, and the inevitable ripple effects of Jenny's decision. But leaving wasn't the end. The next moment shocked everyone. Jenny stepped off the plane with a mix of relief and exhaustion, carrying the weight of months of emotional strain, but also the clarity that comes from decisive action. Life outside India wasn't just a geographic change, it was a psychological shift. Free from the constant scrutiny of Sumit's family, unspoken social expectations, and the intense spotlight of cultural judgment, she could breathe, think, and rebuild on her own terms. Each step forward was both literal and symbolic, a stride toward autonomy she hadn't fully allowed herself before. Publicly, Jenny shared glimpses of her new routine: quiet mornings, work projects, moments with friends who supported her, and travels that seemed to restore a sense of freedom. Verified updates showed her finding joy in simple things: a coffee at a local cafe, walks in nature, laughing without restraint. Social media captured these moments, but unlike the chaos in India, there was a sense of calmness, a pace that reflected her regained control over daily life. Fans noticed the difference immediately, commenting on how her demeanor radiated strength and peace, even after everything that had happened. Yet, leaving didn't erase the emotional imprint of Sumit or the intense months of cross-cultural negotiation. Relationships, especially those intertwined with cultural expectations, create long-lasting psychological marks. Jenny reflected on what she had learned. Persistence has limits, love cannot replace boundaries, and personal growth sometimes requires painful choices. She shared insights subtly in interviews and posts, emphasizing that self-preservation is not selfish, and emotional intelligence is as much about listening to yourself as it is about understanding others. Audiences, as always, had assumptions. Some imagined her life would immediately be perfect, free of any conflict. Others assumed she would regret her choice, longing for reconciliation. Witty commentary online often highlighted these assumptions versus reality, reminding fans that life isn't a tidy narrative. Jenny's story wasn't about instant resolution. It was about nuance, emotional labor, and the messy human process of finding balance between love, duty, and happiness. Even as she enjoyed freedom, subtle reminders of her past life occasionally appeared. Notifications from fans, media inquiries, and comments on old posts served as echoes of the emotional storm she had left behind. Each ping reminded her that public attention doesn't end simply because a decision has been made. Yet, she processed these with calmness, reflecting the psychological resilience she had cultivated during her time in India. Her measured responses to social media, selective engagement, and avoidance of emotionally triggering content were classic examples of boundary setting in a highly visible environment. Sumit's presence in her life remained a source of curiosity, even from afar. Speculation about whether he might attempt reconciliation or struggle with the decision to let go circulated online. Fans debated whether emotional attachment would drive him to act impulsively again or whether he would reflect and adapt. Jenny, aware of these possibilities, navigated them with careful thought. She didn't dismiss his feelings outright, but she maintained her priorities. Emotional intelligence often means anticipating others' reactions while staying anchored in your own values. Small, seemingly trivial details hinted at unresolved tension. A comment from Sumit, a social media post with vague wording, a fan citing that fueled speculation. These subtle cues kept the story alive and the audience engaged, wondering how events might unfold next. Each mini cliffhanger teased developments without revealing outcomes, maintaining suspense and encouraging deeper audience investment. Jenny's personal growth was also evident in how she framed her narrative publicly. She avoided blame-laden language, focusing instead on lessons learned and steps taken to protect her emotional well-being. This approach showcased maturity, self-awareness, and the ability to balance transparency with discretion, a skill often underestimated in high-drama relationships. Fans noted this, praising her for modeling emotional intelligence under intense scrutiny. Behaviorally, her choices reflected a blend of self-preservation and empathy. Leaving India was not an act of rejection, but a decision rooted in realistic assessment. The environment was not conducive to her mental and emotional health. Love remained present, but it existed alongside the understanding that compromise has limits, cultural pressures have consequences, and boundaries are essential for sustainable relationships. Even as Jenny adapted, speculation about future encounters with Sumit fueled engagement. What if he reached out? Would she respond? Could there be reconciliation, partial closure, or ongoing tension? These questions kept fans invested, generating conversation that extended beyond the aired footage. Social media posts, fan commentary, and online debates created a continuous feedback loop, maintaining attention on her journey. Jenny's reflections also offered broader lessons for audiences. Cross-cultural relationships require negotiation, mutual understanding, and clear communication. Emotional boundaries are not just personal, they shape the dynamics of a partnership. Fans recognized these lessons and applied them to their own experiences, adding practical relevance to her story. It wasn't just drama, it was a case study in love, resilience, and self-awareness under pressure. Subtle narrative cues hinted at the next developments. Jenny's occasional social media hints, cryptic comments in interviews, and the ongoing dialogue with fans suggested that her story was far from over. Each post acted as a breadcrumb, ensuring that viewers stayed curious and attentive. The tension between closure and anticipation created a layered narrative, satisfying emotional needs while fueling curiosity about what would happen next. Even mundane moments carried significance. Jenny's laughter in a public cafe, a shared photo with friends, or a casual update about work were all interpreted by fans as signs of emotional progress, potential reunion, or ongoing conflict. Behavioral psychology explains this as the audience's projection. Fans read intention, emotion, and meaning into small cues, sustaining engagement and investment in the narrative. Jenny's independence also sparked dialogue about female agency and emotional labor. By asserting boundaries, she highlighted the importance of self-respect in relationships, especially when cultural and familial expectations clash with personal desires. This generated commentary and debate among viewers, further extending retention and engagement. Fans debated ethics, emotional strategy, and personal responsibility, deepening the emotional resonance of the story. Even as she settled into her new life, unresolved questions lingered. Could Sumit change? Would he adjust his expectations, respect boundaries, and grow personally? How would public perception evolve? Fans speculated endlessly, discussing scenarios, debating motivations, and predicting outcomes. Each possibility acted as a mini cliffhanger, maintaining attention while reinforcing the emotional stakes of the narrative. Jenny's journey became both a cautionary tale and an empowering example. Love can coexist with personal boundaries, cultural pressures can be navigated with awareness, and difficult choices, though painful, can lead to growth. The audience was invited to reflect on their own relationships, consider the balance of love and self-preservation, and engage in thoughtful discussion. Her story transcended reality TV drama, offering both entertainment and insight. And if you think this is the end of Jenny and Sumit's story, wait until you see what happened next, you won't believe it.